The president put forward a budget months ago. Mr. Chairman, Chairman Smith, do you know when the president submitted his budget to the United States Congress?
I don't remember, but it was
March 9th.
It was late. It was due February 1st.
Oh, I'm glad you noted that. Chairman Smith, when did the Republicans submit their budget?
You would need to ask the budget.
I would need to ask the budget chair. Mr. Estes, when did the Republicans submit their budget? Only in the Rules Committee, by the way, could a witness lay blame at the president for being a few weeks late in submitting his budget when his party hasn't submitted a budget, period.
This resolution will ensure that the northern long-eared bat remains protected as a threatened species under the Endangered Species Act. Much like other management activities that we saw with the lesser prairie chicken in the last bill we debated, are success stories. But when U.S. Fish and Wildlife comes in with an uplisting, it will stop the management, and it will actually create worse habitat for the bat as well as many other species, and this is hurting. Let me repeat that. This is hurting an endangered species more than it's helping an endangered species.
The recess, congressional recess, that Republican leadership has announced that apparently is set to commence in less than 2 hours, is 45 days long. Madam Speaker, you can do the math. That leaves this Congress with precious little time to do the people's business, to pass a budget, to fund the government. And instead of doing that, we're debating what? The northern long-eared bat. That is how Republicans in Washington have determined to spend the waning hours of this congressional session. It is consistent with the way that they have conducted their majority in this House for the better part of the last 7 months. I suspect many Americans who are watching today, Madam Speaker, are wondering, what in the world is the House of Representatives debating today? And they are not the only ones. Earlier this afternoon, the majority leader on the Republican side announced that this House would be adjourning this evening. Now, as you know, Madam Speaker, in 65 days, the federal government will not be able to function absent this Congress passing a budget and averting a government shutdown. No bills to lower costs, no bills to grow the middle class, no bills to build safer communities. Bills on gas stoves, hearings on gas stoves, 3 hearings on gas stoves. Bills on the lesser prairie chicken and the northern long-eared bat. The priorities that House Republicans have pursued in this chamber are grossly out of step with the priorities of the American people. The American people expect us to do the people's work. And we are not doing that today. I believe that in 65 days, when House Republicans shut down the government, which they seem determined to do, given that they've passed, what, 1 appropriation bill before they have decided to send everybody home? In 65 days, the American people will be right to question the priorities of congressional Republicans, why they dithered instead of working in good faith with their colleagues to fund the government, to do the basic work of governing. It's an important question, and one I hope every American asks of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. And with that, Madam Speaker, I yield back.
I'm here in support of H.R. 3941, the Schools Not Shelters Act, authored by Representative Molinaro of New York. This legislation would prohibit the use of the facilities of a public elementary school, a public secondary school, or an institution of higher education to shelter or house aliens who have not been admitted into the United States. In short, it sends a full-throated message to the Biden administration, Democrat-run cities, and local leaders across the country that the safety and education of students should not be subject to their pro-illegal immigration whims.
Madam Chair, do you believe that this bill should apply to private schools?
Well, I don't know of any instance where they're trying to put illegal aliens into private schools. We're dealing with taxpayer dollars here.
Got it. So just to ask you a question again, I maybe misunderstood the question. Do you think this should apply to private schools? Let me give you some context. One of your colleagues, Representative Balatakis, I believe, has filed an amendment that would make this bill ultimately apply to private schools that receive federal funding on this legislation. I'm just curious. It's not a trick question. I'm wondering, you're the chairwoman of this committee. Do you support that amendment or do you not support it?
My understanding is that amendment was withdrawn.
So you won't answer the question as to whether or not you believe private schools should be covered under this legislation?
It's not the issue at hand.
Okay, well, it's quite ironic indeed. It is odd to me that you declined to express an opinion on that. You could simply say, I don't think that it should apply to private schools. You might have a rationale for that, or you could say, I think it should, but an amendment wasn't submitted. But in any event, we'll move on to the extent that that's clearly something you don't want to answer. I think I know the reason why. How many markups has your committee held in the last 6 months? We're getting close to the August recess here, another 10 days or so, or I guess 8 days.
Sorry, I don't know exactly how many. We've held a lot.
You've held a lot?
I can get you the number.
Your
for
team
the
is
record.
here. I mean, is it more than 5, more than 10? It can't be.
I don't know exactly how many.
I think
markups.
they're trying to get your attention here. I think they have a number they can give to you.
5.
5. That doesn't sound like a lot, but 5. Okay, so 5 markups. I was expecting you'd say 50 or 100 or 25 or 10, but okay, 5.
Well, we've had a lot of hearings.
I'm sure you have. Of the 5 markups, any bills on teacher pay that you've marked up?
No, because the federal government is not involved in that issue. It's not the role of the federal government to be involved with teacher pay.
Not the role of the federal government to be involved in teacher pay. Okay, good to know. Have you had any markups on student safety, school shootings, hardening schools, taking actions to better protect our students in light of
We
growing
have
violence?
not had a markup.
No markups on that.
school
Any
shootings.
markups on extending learning time for students that are struggling with learning loss following the pandemic? As you've noted, a lot of students ultimately fell behind as a result of the pandemic. I wonder if any bills around.
No markup on that.
No markups on that. So, and any markups on school meals, issues around school meals? Obviously, hunger in schools, kind of an issue that you might have heard of. I know you're familiar with it. I'm just curious if there's been a markup on that.
No, but there will be. We will be working on it.
I'm glad to hear that. I hope that can be scheduled soon because it's a pressing issue in my district and in Colorado. Look, the reason I asked this question, Madam Chair, and I think you've answered it for me, 8 months under Republican control of the House, no markups on school safety, no markups on teacher pay, no markups on hunger in schools, no markups on trying to address learning gaps as a result of the pandemic. Apparently, on the notion of teacher pay, according to the chairwoman, completely impermissible for this committee to hold a hearing on that. Isn't a matter for the federal government to be concerned with. But telling local school districts back in North Carolina or in Virginia or in Colorado what to do with their buildings, somehow that is a matter of province, of federal jurisdiction. But the issue around paying teachers is not? Is that the argument that I guess you're making today? I'm trying to understand how those two things can both be true. That the Education Committee should have no role in teacher pay, but should tell every school district in the United States of America what they can and cannot do with their buildings. Is that the committee's position?
Right now, we have a crisis at our border, as we're told by everyone, and we have the possibility of illegal aliens being housed in buildings, mostly adults, where very close to where children might be. You could consider that a school safety issue, and we do consider it a school safety issue. So you might want to look at it that way. So yes, we're dealing with school safety. If you have adult males in close proximity, we have no idea who they are, what their backgrounds are, you could consider that a school safety
Ms.
issue.
Fox, you heard the question. That wasn't the question. The question was, is it the committee's position that the federal government has no role to play with respect to teacher pay and has every role to play with respect to telling these school districts and schools what they can and cannot do with their facilities? And it sounds like the answer is yes. And if the answer is yes, you can say yes. I don't, that can be your position.
We do not have a role to play in teacher pay. That is not our role. We have a role into considering about school safety, which is saying we have not, and this is a school
I think the American
safety.
public would be mighty frustrated were they to realize the ways in which the Republicans in Congress have constricted the committee's jurisdiction so that the Education Committee is no longer a place that can hold hearings and inquiries as to how to help ensure that public school teachers can afford to live in the communities that they call home, as Ranking Member Scott did in the last Congress, holding a markup on that very subject, or enabling the committee to hear about student hunger so that students are actually fed and don't go hungry, or taking steps, by the way, bipartisan steps, to try to protect our schools in light of the growing threat of violence in terms of school shootings. Apparently, all of that is off the table for this Education Committee. And instead, we get bills like this one. And I think it's deeply disappointing. I suspect the American people will feel the same way. I also find it deeply ironic that the same group of my colleagues, and not all of them, but many of them, who bemoan any role for the federal government in education policy, who disclaim any ability for the Secretary of Education to have a role in secondary schools, to now say that there's an exception and that this is it. Did you vote, Madam Chair? There was an amendment, you probably recall this, about a month ago. I think it was a month ago. Time has flown by here the last couple of months. To abolish the Department of Education. I think it was to terminate the Department of Education. Did you vote for that amendment?
I'm sorry, I don't remember that amendment.
There was an amendment during a bill that you brought before this committee regarding sports in Title IX. And the amendment to that bill was brought by a gentleman on this committee, Mr. Massey. He's not here to defend the propriety of his amendment, but there are other colleagues of his who are here who co-sponsored that amendment. I believe 164 Republicans voted for it, and I'm wondering if you were among them.
I don't know, but I would, if the Lord put me in charge, I would get the federal government out of education in a heartbeat, because it's not delineated.
This seems like an awfully odd way to do that, Ms. Fox. Madam Chair, with all respect, that's what I'm saying. You did vote. My understanding is you voted for this amendment to terminate the Department of Education. That's consistent with what you just said in terms of, if you had your ability to do that, you'd abolish it. And if that's the case, I'm not sure why you keep bringing bills to this committee to give the Department of Education and the Secretary of Education more powers over local schools in North Carolina and every other state in the country. It is an odd way to remove the federal government from education policy, but that's your prerogative as chair, and I'm not going to get in your way. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back the balance of my time.